A quick content warning. This episode contains discussion of abortion. Just wanting you to know before going in. Thank you. Chicago, 1916. A black nightclub on South State Street called the Elite Cafe. The room is hazy with cigarette smoke. Glasses of gin crowd the tables. The band is playing something slow and sultry. A white woman sits at a table near the back. She's in her early 20s. She's been in show business since she was 7. Stock companies, amateur nights, vaudeville circuits, some false starts on Broadway. But nothing's worked. Not really. As she sits there, she watches the dance floor. Many of the couples are doing the same thing. They stay rooted to one spot, barely moving their feet, just shaking. Shoulders, torsos, hips. The whole upper body trembling like something's trying to get out. The woman at the back can't look away. Later, she'll write about this night. She'll say she found it amusing at first, but there was something else, too. As she put it, a naked, aching, sensual agony about it. The regulars call it the shimmy shawobble. The dance isn't new. It's been developing in black clubs and dance halls for years. What is new is where the woman watching from the back of the room, Mae West, is about to take it. On October 4th, 1918, West steps onto the stage at the Schubert Theater on Broadway. A new musical called Sometime is in the middle of its opening night. The orchestra hits a vamp. West, in a bit part, playing a smart-mouthed chorus girl named Mamie, starts to sing a number. It begins conventionally enough. She's holding the audience. Then she does something no one sees coming. She plants her feet, she stops moving, and she shakes. Shoulders, torso, hips. Her whole upper body trembling like something's trying to get out. The audience loses its mind. They stomp, they shout, they cheer, and they refuse to let the performance continue. They won't let her off stage. The production halts until she makes a speech. She does the shimmy again. They still won't let her go. It's obvious to everyone in the audience and on the stage. Mae West has just created a sensation. As she basks in the applause, she can't help but break into a grin. The American public is finally confirming something she's known for a long time now. Something she sensed in every laugh at a double meaning, every raised eyebrow, every gasp at an act deemed too coarse for polite theater. And it's something Mae West is going to spend the rest of her life proving. Sex sells. Welcome to When They Were Making It. I'm your host, Patrick Rankin, and this is the podcast that dives deep into the glorious, often messy, and utterly human stories behind Hollywood's greatest films, and the legends who created them. Today, we're exploring Mae West, the vaudeville performer who wrote herself into stardom, turned innuendo into an art form and a business, and redefined what female sexuality could look like on the American stage and screen. Mary Jane West was born on August 17, 1893, in a cold-water flat in Brooklyn, delivered at home by an aunt who worked as a midwife. The family called her Mamie. There was no birth certificate. Her father, John Patrick West, was a boxer who'd fought his first bout at 11 and never really stopped fighting. He worked as a livery stable owner, bartender, special policeman, private investigator, whatever paid. His friends were weightlifters and fighters, black and white. Everyone called him Battlin' Jack. Mamie's mother, Matilda Tilly Dolger, had come over from Bavaria in 1886 and worked as a dressmaker and corset model. She was warm, formidable, and ambitious. The Wests were a working-class family, never quite stable, moving constantly through North Brooklyn, Bushwick Avenue, Herbert Street, Meeker Avenue, Humboldt Street. Bushwick, in the 1890s, was the beer capital of the Northeast. 14 breweries in a 14-block stretch, German immigrants running singing societies and beer halls, the smell of hops in the air. Mamie was the eldest of 3 children, followed by a sister, Mildred, later known as Beverly, and a brother, John, whom the family called Jack. The West family had little money, but Tilly had enormous plans for her daughter. Whatever ambitions she may once have held for herself were soon transferred almost entirely to Mamie. Tilly wanted to put her little girl on the stage. By age 3, Mamie was mimicking family members and neighbors. At 5, she performed at a church social. At 7, Tilly enrolled her in dance school and began entering her in amateur night competitions across Brooklyn under the stage name Baby Mae. She won her first contest at the Royal Theatre. Pink and green satin dress, a song called Movin' Day, a $10 prize. Jack, who'd been skeptical about his daughter performing publicly, became her biggest fan. He built her a stage in the basement. He was the one who dragged her costume case to every show. Around age 8, Mamie was spotted at an amateur night and recruited into Hal Clarendon's stock company at the Gotham Theater in East New York. For the next several years, she played child roles in melodramas. Little Eva in Uncle Tom's Cabin, the crying daughter in 10 Nights in a Barroom, Little Nell, Little Lord Fauntleroy. When there were no child parts, she performed in the olios between acts, singing popular songs and doing impressions. By the time she was 10, Mamie was the principal breadwinner for the West family. She rarely went to school. She would never lose her Brooklyn accent. What she learned on stages and in dressing rooms and from watching other people work. By 13, Mamie was too old for child roles and too young for anything else. For 2 years, she drifted. By 1907, at 14, she was back, billing herself now as Mae West. She tried everything vaudeville had to offer: song and dance, comedy, blackface, male impersonation. Nothing stuck. But she was watching. From Burt Williams, a black comedian she'd become fascinated with, and with whom her father had arranged a meeting, She learned the double meaning, how to say one thing and let the audience hear another. From Eva Tanguay, the highest paid woman in vaudeville, she learned that a woman could build an act around sex and not apologize for it. From drag performers like Bert Savoy and Julien Eltange, she saw how femininity itself could be exaggerated, stylized, and turned into entertainment. She began developing a slower walk, a more deliberate way of speaking, and a femininity that felt increasingly like a performance. She didn't have an act yet, but she was starting to see the shape of one. On tour, West met a song and dance man named Frank Wallace. Tilly introduced them backstage. They formed a duo, toured the smaller circuits together. On April 11th, 1911, in Milwaukee, West married him, a decision made hours before the ceremony. She was 17. She'd falsified her age on the certificate. She regretted it almost immediately. She made Wallace promise never to tell anyone, especially her parents. West broke up the act and sent him on a touring show without her. They stayed married, but they never lived together again. With the husband out of the picture, West refocused. That fall, she got her first few shots at Broadway. A la Broadway closed after 8 performances. The next play, Vera Violetta, fired her during tryouts. Some said for upstaging the star, some for inciting a riot. 2 shows by 18, 2 failures. West went back to the vaudeville circuits. But now she was developing something. Still not quite an act, but a style. Songs that weren't dirty, but sounded like they might be. A slow, deliberate way of moving. A way of talking to the audience like she was letting them in on a secret. The problem was, nobody knew what to do with her. She wasn't wholesome enough for the big-time theaters. She wasn't outright lewd enough for burlesque. Variety around this time called her a rough soubrette and said her material was unfit for the $2 crowd. She was working, she just wasn't becoming a star. In August 1913, while performing on a vaudeville bill in Detroit, West met a man named Guido Darrow. Darrow was a 27-year-old Italian-born piano accordion virtuoso, the first accordionist to play big-time vaudeville, one of the highest-paid acts on the circuit. West was 20, still struggling. She fell for Darrow hard. She would later write, "It went very deep, hitting on all the emotions. You can't get too hot over anybody unless there's something that goes along with the sex act, can you?" But Darrow was possessive. He spied on her, bribed phone operators to report her calls, punched a man in a restaurant who talked to her. He told her parents, "I kill the next man that tries to take her away from me." And then West got pregnant. A pregnancy would be a problem. West was still legally married to Wallace. Darrow was still legally married to his first wife. And a baby would end her career before it started. On Tilly's advice, West had an abortion. It was performed somewhere on the road, possibly Oregon, by an unlicensed practitioner. Abortion was illegal everywhere in the country at the time. The procedure was dangerous, and this one was botched. West nearly bled to death. The infection that followed almost killed her. For days, it wasn't clear if she would survive. She did, but when it was over, she would never have children. Then, Mae West left. She disappeared to Chicago. Darrow's possessiveness, his jealousy, her mother's opposition, the abortion, it all became too much. Darrow fell apart, calling Tilly at all hours, begging to know where Mae was, drinking heavily, ending up hospitalized. West later wrote, "It was not an easy time for me. I was tempted to call Dee, but I had promised Mother I wouldn't." When she got back to New York, West threw herself into work. She tried new material, new acts, new circuits. None of it caught fire. By 1916, her career had stalled completely. Her agent had died. The bookings were drying up. She was now 23 and running out of options. Then Tilly introduced her to a lawyer named James Timoney, an Irish Catholic attorney from Brooklyn, 9 years older, devoutly religious, and well-connected in the theater world. They became a couple, and Timoney saw something in her that the vaudeville critics didn't. He thought she had real talent. She just hadn't found the right vehicle for it. Over the next couple of years, he started helping her with contracts, bookings, the legal side of the business. Around this time, on a trip to Chicago, West ended up at a club on the South Side called the Elite Cafe, a black venue with a mixed crowd. It was here, on the dance floor, that she saw something that would change the trajectory of her life. The couples weren't moving around the room. They were rooted to the spot, feet planted, legs still, while everything from the waist up rolled and shuddered and shook. It looked like sex standing in place. They called it the shimmy shawabble. The shimmy wasn't new. It had roots in West African traditions, had spread north during the Great Migration, and had been performed in black clubs and dance halls in Chicago, New Orleans, and Harlem for years. But to white America, to Broadway, it might as well not have existed. West watched. She filed it away. Back in New York, she kept working the circuits while Timoney worked his connections. By 1918, he'd leveraged his way into getting her an audition for a new Broadway musical, a romance called Sometime, produced by Arthur Hammerstein. The cast was already set. Ed Wynn as the lead comedian, Francine Larimore as the leading lady. But there was a smaller role, a smart-mouthed chorus girl named Mamie. West auditioned. She got the part. Sometime opened on October 4th, 1918, at the Shubert Theater. A full house for a light romantic comedy. Nothing anyone expected to remember. West had a few scenes and one number that mattered. What do you have to do to get it? The song was forgettable. What happened during it wasn't. Midway through the number, West stopped moving. She planted her feet, locked her legs, and let her upper body take over. Shoulders rolling, torso shaking. The same movement she'd seen in Chicago, now on a Broadway stage, in front of a white audience that had never seen anything like it. The room erupted. The crowd stomped, hollered, refused to let her continue. Variety ran the notice the next day. Mae West stopped the show with her shimmy dance, then made a speech, then another. The show ran 283 performances, the longest-running musical of the season. By the time it closed, West was known across the city as the Shimmy Queen. Mae West was 25 years old. She'd been performing for nearly 2 decades. And for the first time, she had a hit. The shimmy had made Mae West a sensation, but it did not make her a star. By 1921, the dance had spread everywhere, and that was the problem. Every revue had a shimmy number now. Every chorus girl could do it. What had made West special for a season was now just another bit of business. What followed for West was 5 years of false starts, shows that flopped, partnerships that fizzled. She fired one pianist when he started getting bigger applause than she did. A promising revue killed when the producer absconded with the funds. She kept touring vaudeville, kept getting bookings, kept working. But by the mid-20s, she was past 30. A theater veteran with little name recognition and few prospects. She had to take burlesque work here and there just to stay afloat. Then she started to see things differently. Mae West had been rewriting her own material for years, punching up lines, reworking parts that didn't fit her until they did. She was smart, she was quick. She had a gag file and a knack for the double meaning. The only thing she'd never done was write the whole thing. If the big break wasn't coming, why couldn't she manufacture it herself? So she started writing. In 1924, Timony bought a 1-act sketch from a client for $300. A story about a Montreal prostitute who seduces British sailors. West expanded it into a 3-act play with a collaborator, writing on paper bags and envelopes and scraps of stationery. When it was finished, she submitted it to the Schuberts under a pseudonym. They sent back a curt rejection. No established producer would touch it. So they produced it themselves. Timony organized the Morals Production Corporation, funded by a small group of investors, which included himself, Tilly, and Oni Madden, a bootlegger and cotton club owner who ran with West's crowd. They cast unknowns. West's sister, Beverly, served as her understudy. Between Timony's connections and whatever remained of West's name from the shimmy days, they managed to secure a theater, Daly's 63rd Street. Not a prestigious house, but Broadway nonetheless. During rehearsals in Waterbury, Connecticut, hours before the first tryout, West pulled the director aside. The play was called The Albatross. To West, it wasn't working. She already knew what the public wanted. She knew it from the response to the shimmy. You've got to hit them in the eye with it. So change the title, she said. They called it Sex. Sex opened on April 26, 1926. West played Margie Lamont, a prostitute caught up with a corrupt pimp, sailors, and a society woman who turns out to be less moral than Margie herself. The production relied heavily on melodrama, sexual innuendo, and West's established stage persona. She crossed the stage with the slow, rolling walk she had been developing in vaudeville, delivered the dialogue in her deliberate style, and incorporated the shimmy into her performance. Audiences reacted strongly. Some cheered and called her back. Others walked out. The critics were considerably less divided. They savaged it. Billboard called it the cheapest, most vulgar low show to have dared to open in New York this year. The Times called it crude and inept. The Daily Mirror called it a monstrosity plucked from the garbage can. To audiences, none of this seemed to matter. Within weeks, word of mouth had produced lines down the block. Humorist and theater critic Robert Benchley called it a whacking hit that succeeded solely because the papers had said it was vulgar and bold, and because someone had the genius to think of its name. At its peak, Sex was taking in $10,000 a week. Everyone wanted to see what all the noise was about. Society figures, judges, police officers, and their wives. The city's own play jury reviewed the production and gave it a clean pass. By the time it closed, 375 performances, one of the longest running shows on Broadway that season, 325,000 people had seen it. And Sex did something else. It gave West the sustained success everything else had not. After 2 decades of trying to break through, stock companies, vaudeville circuits, Broadway flops, the shimmy, Sex lasted. And she'd done it entirely on her own terms. Written it herself, produced it herself, titled it something no marquee had ever dared to spell out. Mae West was 33 years old, and she was just getting started. While Sex was still packing the house at Daly's, West was finishing up her next play, which she had been writing after the curtain came down each night. She called it The Drag. It was a 3-act play about a closeted gay man married to a woman, set against a world of drag balls and double lives. The final act was a full-scale drag ball on stage. Costumes, jazz band, bawdy songs, improvised comedy. Nothing like it had ever been attempted on the legitimate stage. And to cast it, West went straight to the source. She auditioned 50 gay men at Paul and Joe's, a restaurant on West 9th Street that became a cabaret after dark. She cast 12 of them as principals. The rehearsals were largely improvisational. West wrote the framework, then let the actors develop parts of the scenes, dialogue, and mannerisms themselves. She also brought members of the cast home to meet her mother. They did Tilly's hair and nails. The show opened on January 31st, 1927, at a burlesque house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the only venue Timony could book. It sold out. It moved to Paterson, New Jersey, where the mayor warned West not to open. She opened anyway, again to a packed house. In Bayonne, police ordered the seated audience out of the theater in the middle of a performance. The Drag gave 10 performances across 3 cities. Each either sold out or was shut down. West wanted to bring it to Broadway. The New York Society for the Suppression of Vice warned her that if she did, every show on Broadway could face greater scrutiny. Producers and theater owners refused to provide her with a venue. Then the state legislature passed the Wales Padlock Law, part of the growing campaign against Broadway's so-called sex plays, with the drag at the center of the controversy. The law prohibited portrayals of homosexuality on the New York stage. A theater that violated it could be closed down for up to a year, and actors playing gay characters risked arrest. The Drag never made it to Broadway. The law would remain on the books for 40 years. On February 9th, 1927, the police came for sex. That night, officers raided 3 Broadway plays simultaneously. The Captive, a French lesbian drama starring Helen Menken and Basil Rathbone. The Virgin Man, a comedy that had been struggling to fill seats. And Sex. At Daly's, the officers waited, letting West finish her performance. She played the final scene, took her bows, returned to her dressing room, put on a black cloche hat and a knee-length fur coat, and stepped outside, into a waiting taxi headed for the Hell's Kitchen police station. 20 cast members were arrested with her. They spent the night at the Jefferson Market Women's Prison. Bail was set at $1,000. The following day, the district attorney offered the producers a deal. Close the shows, and the charges would be dropped. The producers of The Captive accepted. The producers of The Virgin Man accepted. West refused. A reporter asked what she expected to happen. "I expect," she reportedly said, "this will be the making of me." The trial opened in late March. West and the other defendants were charged with presenting an indecent, immoral, and impure play. A police inspector read from his notes in a solemn monotone, describing how West had moved her buttocks in a way as to suggest an act of sexual intercourse. Another officer testified that she had moved her navel up and down and from left to right. The defense attorney asked, "Did you actually see her navel?" "No," the officer replied, "but I saw something in her middle that moved from east to west." The courtroom laughed. The judge rebuked them. "This is not a show, it's a trial." On April 5th, the verdict came down. Guilty. West was sentenced to 10 days in jail and fined $500. She told reporters on her way out of the courthouse, "Give my regards to Broadway." By now, the entire country was paying attention. The trial had been front-page news for weeks. Mae West, the woman who'd written a play called Sex, refused to close it and faced the state of New York in court about it, was going to jail. West reported to the women's workhouse on Welfare Island in a limousine. She arrived carrying a bouquet of white roses, wearing silk underwear beneath her clothes. She'd be damned, she said, if she was going to wear the prison issue cotton. She smiled for the photographers. During her time in jail, West charmed the staff. She dined with the warden and his wife. She got to know the other women, becoming friends with some of them. In total, West served 8 days, receiving 2 days off for good behavior. "The first time," she said, "I ever got anything for good behavior." West walked out of Welfare Island more famous than she'd ever been. The trial had made her a household name. The jail sentence had made her a martyr. Now, she needed to translate that into a hit. Her next play, The Wicked Age, a satire about beauty contests, wouldn't provide it. It opened in November 1927 and closed after 19 performances. But the play after that, Diamond Lil, would. While serving her 8 days on Welfare Island, West had taken notes on the inmates. The way they talked, the way they carried themselves, the stories they told. She'd filed it all away, the same way she'd filed away the shimmy on the dance floor in Chicago. Diamond Lil would call on all of it. She set Diamond Lil in the Bowery of the 1890s, a world of saloons, con men, prize fighters, and political bosses. Some of its characters drew on real figures, including Frankie Baker, a black woman from St. Louis, whose killing of her lover inspired the folk ballad Frankie and Johnny, which West incorporated into the play. At the center of the play was Diamond Lil, a saloon singer covered in diamonds who moved slow, spoke deliberately, and maintained control over the men around her. West built the character around the stage persona she had been developing for years. Diamond Lil opened on April 9, 1928, at the Royale Theater, a real Broadway house this time, not a second-tier venue on the fringe. And this time, the reviews were positive. The Herald Tribune noted that audiences were crowding the theater at each performance, anxious to encourage a conscience-stricken transgressor in her desire to be meritorious. The New Yorker called her 100% good showman. The show ran 323 performances, another hit. And somewhere in those performances, the major elements of West's public persona were now assembled. The diamonds, the furs, the slow, rolling walk, and the deliberate delivery that allowed her to turn ordinary dialogue into innuendo. Diamond Lil wasn't just a role. It was who Mae West would be for the rest of her life. From there, West didn't slow down. In October 1928, while still performing Diamond Lil every night at the Royale, she opened a new play 2 blocks away. Pleasure Man was the drag reworked for a Broadway that had outlawed homosexuality on stage. She kept the drag ball, she kept the gay cast, but she changed the protagonist from a closeted gay man to a straight womanizer, and had him castrated and killed in the final act. The entire cast was arrested on opening night. 56 people. The next day, with Actors Equity warning the cast they'd be risking prosecution, they performed a matinee anyway. Police raided that one too. Before the arrests, one of the drag performers delivered a speech about oppression from the stage. The audience cheered. 2 performances, 2 raids. The resulting trial continued until 1930, when the charges were dismissed. In 1931, West opened The Constant Sinner, set in Harlem and centered on a white woman who takes a black lover. West originally cast Lorenzo Tucker, the actor known as the Black Valentino. The Schuberts, who were financing the production, refused to allow a black man to play her lover on Broadway. Tucker was replaced by a white actor in blackface. His contract required him to remove his wig during the curtain call, so the audience would know that it was a white actor that had been touching West on stage. When the touring production reached Washington, Tucker was permitted to play the role. He kissed West on stage, and lynching threats followed. West hid him in a Washington hotel for 2 weeks before smuggling him back to New York. The Constant Sinner ran for 64 performances. By the end of 1931, West had written 10 plays. 6 had been produced on or near Broadway. Her productions had led to 3 arrests, 1 jail sentence, and approximately 400,000 ticket sales. The controversy surrounding the drag had also helped drive the passage of a New York censorship law. She'd written her own material, produced her own shows, cast from communities nobody else would touch, and, for the most part, refused to make it more palatable. West would later put it simply, if not modestly, I was the first liberated woman. She was now 38 years old. She'd conquered the stage, and Hollywood had no idea what was coming. In 1932, Paramount Pictures was in trouble. The studio that had posted $18 million in profit in 1930 was hemorrhaging money. Its theater chain, over 1,000 locations acquired during its boom years, was bleeding cash faster than the films could replace it. Due to the Depression, national movie attendance had dropped 40%. Payroll had been slashed by $6 million. The company was sliding toward bankruptcy. They needed bodies in seats. They needed something that would cut through the noise. And they were willing to try anything. In the summer of 1932, they found it. George Raft had just made a splash as a coin-flipping gangster in Scarface. Paramount was developing his first starring vehicle, a speakeasy picture called Night After Night, and they needed someone for a supporting role. Director Archie Mayo wanted Texas Guinan, the queen of the speakeasies, for the supporting role. But Raft pushed back. I know a woman who would be sensational. Raft and Mae West went way back to New York. They'd run in the same circles, theatrical, underworld, overlapping. He went to William LeBaron, the film's producer. LeBaron had known West himself since 1911. He knew what she could do with a part. So she was signed, $5,000 a week for about 2 months. On June 16th, 1932, West and Timony boarded a 4-day train from New York to Pasadena. Timony was still managing her, still handling contracts, still investing her money, still devoted. The romance between them had cooled years ago, but the partnership hadn't. He was her manager, her protector, her closest companion, of 16 years by now. They settled into the Ravenswood, an Art Deco apartment building 5 blocks from the Paramount lot. West took apartment 611 on the 6th floor. Timony took a separate unit downstairs. West's first order of business when she got to the studio was to really study the script that had been handed to her. She quickly decided she hated it. So she did what she did best. She rewrote it. She took the small role of Maudie Triplett, the brash, bejeweled ex-girlfriend of Raft's speakeasy owner, and Mae Westified it. New dialogue, new timing, new quips. Night After Night opened that fall. West was 4th billed. She had about 10 minutes of screen time. It was enough. Critics and audiences zeroed in on the same thing. Mae West. She was funny. She was sharp. And she was unlike anything Hollywood had put on screen before. One exchange in particular caught fire. A hat-check girl notices West's jewelry and gasps, "Goodness, what beautiful diamonds." West, handing over her mink, replies, "Goodness had nothing to do with it, dearie." Everything she'd spent her career building on stage, the timing, the innuendo, the slow roll of a line, it all translated. The camera didn't flatten her, it amplified her. Raft said it best. She stole everything but the cameras. Paramount moved fast. They signed her to a long-term contract before Night After Night finished its run. $100,000 a year, her own bungalow on the lot, script approval, the right to pick her co-stars. It was an unprecedented agreement for a newcomer, especially a woman pushing 40. But Paramount saw what they had, and they weren't about to lose it. West, for her part, had clearly decided she was staying. She had the Ravenswood apartment redecorated. White and gold everything. A canopied bed with a gilt W on the headboard. Mirrors surrounding the bed on every side. Polar bear rugs. A nude marble statuette of herself in the living room. When someone asked about the mirrors, she reportedly replied, "I like to see how I'm doing." Mae West had made herself at home in Hollywood. It was quickly decided her first picture would be Diamond Lil, the diamond-draped, wisecracking siren she'd been playing on Broadway since 1928. It would be the perfect vehicle to introduce her to the masses. There was just one problem. By 1932, Hollywood was, on paper, operating under the production code, a set of moral rules the major studios had formally adopted 2 years earlier. And Diamond Lil, a story built around a prostitute in a Bowery saloon who outsmarts every man in the room and faces no real punishment for it, violated those rules almost from beginning to end. The Hays Office was the industry organization responsible for overseeing the code, and its studio relations committee reviewed scripts and proposed productions. Diamond Lil had already been placed on the office's list of material considered unacceptable for the screen. The catch, and the good news for both Paramount and Mae West, was that the committee's decisions were not binding. It could object to a film, recommend changes, and warn that local censor boards might reject it, but it had little power to stop a film from being made. A studio could ignore the objections, release the picture anyway, and take its chances. And that was exactly what Paramount did. The studio needed a hit more than it needed the Hays Office approval. So it changed the title, eventually landing on She Done Him Wrong, and started shooting. It also made changes, renamed the character Lady Lou, removed a white slavery subplot, and scrubbed the most explicit dialogue. Father Daniel Lord, the Jesuit priest who co-wrote the production code in 1930, wasn't fooled. She Done Him Wrong is the filthy Diamond Lil slipping by under a new name. For the male lead, West would tell the story of how she had spotted a young man walking across the lot. She asked who he was. Cary Grant, they told her, a contract player who hadn't broken through. If this guy can talk, I'll take him. Never mind that Cary Grant and West had already reportedly crossed paths during their years on Broadway, and that, by this time, Grant had already appeared in several Paramount films, including Blonde Venus opposite Marlene Dietrich, hardly an unknown. She Done Him Wrong opened on January 27, 1933. It made $2 million, 10 times its budget. In the middle of the Depression, with a quarter of the country out of work, people lined up to watch Mae West tell Cary Grant to come up sometime and see her. The film would go on to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. But everyone knew what the film's success really meant. Producer William LeBaron told exhibitors what the numbers already proved. She Done Him Wrong must be credited with having saved Paramount when that studio was considering selling out to MGM, and when Paramount theaters, 1,700 of them, thought of closing their doors and converting into office buildings. Paramount didn't actually have 1,700 theaters. LeBaron was pitching to exhibitors, not filing a report. But the point was the same. West hadn't just made a hit. She'd bought the studio time to survive. The film's success made her the toast of Hollywood. The biggest new star in the industry, invited everywhere, wanted by everyone. But it quickly became clear to anyone paying attention that Mae West had no interest in playing the part off-screen. She didn't drink, didn't smoke, rarely went to parties. When newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst invited her to one of his weekend getaways at his estate, San Simeon, she reportedly declined, saying, "I got no time for parties." She was too busy working. She rose at 6 when filming. She wrote constantly, between pictures, between takes, wherever she could. The next script was always already underway. Most of the real writing happened at home. "I do all my writing in bed," she said. "Everybody knows I do my best work there." She wasn't interested in playing the scene. Just like on Broadway, she was interested in staying ahead. Her next film was already in motion. I'm No Angel started shooting in July 1933, shortly after She Done Him Wrong finished its run. West had written the screenplay herself. She played Tyra, a circus performer who climbs her way to society and ends up suing a millionaire for breach of promise. A courtroom scene where Tyra cross-examines her former lovers, one by one, was the centerpiece. The lines were pure Mae West. "When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better. It's not the men in your life that counts. It's the life in your men." Audiences couldn't get enough. I'm No Angel opened on October 6, 1933. In its first week at the Paramount Theater on Broadway, it sold 180,000 tickets, a new record for the house. By the time it finished its run, it had grossed about $3 million worldwide. It was the studio's biggest hit of the year. Another hit for Mae West, and another saving grace for Paramount. In little more than a year, West had taken the country by storm and become one of Hollywood's biggest new stars. She'd entered an industry already dominated by women, including Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Jean Harlow, and Joan Crawford, each of whom had developed a distinct screen identity within the studio system. West's position was unusual even among them. She wrote or substantially reshaped her own material, exercised approval over her scripts, and had influence over the actors cast opposite her. The persona audiences saw on screen had not been designed for her by Paramount. She had spent decades constructing it herself. She'd also recently turned 40. Unlike many female stars whose careers were built around youth or romantic innocence, West had never presented herself as an ingenue. Her appeal rested on experience, authority, humor, and complete confidence in her own desirability. And perhaps the most important distinction, Mae West sold sex. She'd brought it into the mainstream in a way Hollywood had rarely allowed. Right there on the surface, delivered with a wink and a one-liner. Blatantly, unapologetically, almost gleefully. Her characters were prostitutes, kept women, gold diggers, and they prospered. Not through redemption, not by learning a lesson, through wit, sexuality, and an absolute refusal to apologize for either. America had never seen anything quite like it. or anyone quite like Mae West. As Variety put it, Mae West's films have made her the biggest conversation provoker, free space grabber, and all-around box office bet in the country. She's as hot an issue as Hitler. Mae West was no longer simply a movie star. She had become the center of a national argument about sex, women, censorship, and what Hollywood should be permitted to show. People were fascinated. Some were furious. For Paramount, it all amounted to one thing. Her films were selling tickets, and the studio had no reason to believe that would stop anytime soon. America had a problem. It was on every screen in the country, in every theater, in every town, in every state. Sex, sold openly, laughed about casually, celebrated without consequence. Women who took money from men and faced no punishment. Prostitutes who outsmarted the police. Heroines who sinned and prospered and never once asked for forgiveness. And to many, at the center of all of it, the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong with American morals was one woman, Mae West. Father Daniel Lord, co-architect of the production code, had watched the studios ignore his rules for 4 years. He'd watched the box office numbers climb. He'd watched audiences line up. West, he said, was the very sort of person the code was meant to contain. And the pressure surrounding films like hers was becoming impossible to ignore. Religious organizations, women's groups, civic reformers, and members of Congress were all demanding stronger controls over what Hollywood put on screen. The studios had spent years insisting they could regulate themselves. The fact that they had been openly flouting the production code said otherwise. Now, the threat to Hollywood was no longer only reputational. Organized boycotts were beginning to keep audiences away from theaters and were cutting into box office receipts. The studios could no longer afford to treat the pressure as something that would simply pass. So they did what they'd refused to do up until now. They agreed to enforce their own rules. On June 13th, 1934, Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, Fox, RKO, Universal, Columbia, and United Artists approved the Production Code Administration, a new censorship office to enforce the code, and one with real power. From July of that year, every film released by the major studios would require its seal of approval. Any member studio that released a picture without one faced a $25,000 fine. The man chosen to run this new office was a former newspaper reporter from Philadelphia named Joseph Breen. He had been pushing for this moment for years, working behind the scenes, conspiring with bishops, drafting memos, building the case that Hollywood was rotting America from the inside out. Now, he had the power to do something about it, and he knew exactly where to start. Breen had been watching Mae West since she'd done him wrong. He knew what she did and what she represented. He also knew that every attempt to rein her in had failed. The play jury that had gave sex a clean pass, the censors who let Diamond Lil slip through under a new title. But he understood something else about Mae West that the previous censors hadn't. The problem wasn't the words on the page. It was what she did with them. Any line, no matter how innocent, became something else when she delivered it. A script could be scrubbed clean and she'd still make it filthy, with a pause, a look, a roll of the hips. As Breen would later write, difficulty is inherent in a Mae West picture. Lines and pieces of business, which in the script seem to be thoroughly innocuous, turn out, when shown on the screen, to be questionable at best, when they are not definitely offensive. He couldn't ban Mae West, but he could make sure that every script she wrote, every line she delivered, every scene she filmed passed through him first. And he would cut and cut and cut until what was left on screen was something Mae West could no longer make dangerous. West's first picture under this new administration was already in production. It was called It Ain't No Sin. West played Ruby Carter, a singer in a New Orleans saloon, a kept woman, prize fighters, murder. Shooting had started in March 1934, before the code had teeth. By the time it was finished, everything had changed. Breen rejected the first script in its entirety. Vulgarity, obscenity, glorification of a prostitute. A theme definitely on the side of evil and crime. He sent Paramount a list of required cuts. The implication of a 5-day affair, quote, violent and lustful kissing, end quote, a song called Creole Man, an ode to marijuana with a lover the censors read as black. More than that, the title, It Ain't No Sin, had to go. Religious groups weren't entirely sure what it was. Paramount scrambled through alternatives. St. Louis Woman, Belle of New Orleans, before landing on Belle of the 90s. Last, but definitely not least, the ending would have to be reshot. In the original, West's character reconciles with her lover and walks off into the sunset. No ceremony, no apology. Breen demanded a wedding, marriage in place of the character's independence, and the studio complied. West did win one battle. She'd hired Duke Ellington and his orchestra for the musical numbers, and the studio wanted cheaper extras on set to pantomime over the pre-recorded music. West put her foot down, and Ellington stayed on screen. Belle of the 90s was released on September 21st, 1934. It made $2 million, profitable by any measure. But audiences and critics noticed what was missing. The edge, the danger, the thing that made a Mae West picture a Mae West picture. The film had, as Variety put it, been sufficiently denatured from within. There was no getting around it. Belle of the 90s was a clear step down from She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel. For Breen, however, it was proof of concept. He could point to the numbers, point to the cuts, and tell religious groups that the era of Mae West doing whatever she wanted was over. West's next picture, Goin' to Town, arrived in the spring of 1935. She'd learned the game now. If she couldn't fight the code head-on anymore, she'd work around it. She wrote the screenplay herself, a saloon girl trying to pass as a lady. Class comedy instead of sexual comedy. Fewer one-liners. More plot. Strategic innuendo instead of the old full frontal assault. Breen reviewed the script and wrote to Will Hayes, head of the industry's censorship office. The latest Mae West picture has been handled satisfactorily. The most dangerous woman in Hollywood had been handled satisfactorily. Some lines still slipped through. For a long time, I was ashamed of the way I lived. You mean to say you reformed? No, I got over being ashamed. But the trajectory was unmistakable now. 2 pictures under the code, 2 pictures that had come out smaller than they went in. Each one a little safer, a little quieter, a little less Mae West. And yet, by the numbers, none of it seemed to matter. Not yet. When the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee published the nation's top earners from tax records for 1935, Mae West had made $480,000 that year, the second highest income in the United States. Not for an actress, not for a woman, for a person. Only newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst, at $500,000, earned more. And West was living accordingly. By now, she didn't just live at the Ravenswood, she owned the building. She'd bought a 22-room beach house in Santa Monica, a ranch in the San Fernando Valley for her father. She'd sent for her brother and sister and set them up in Hollywood too. On the surface, everything looked like triumph. The money was enormous. The real estate was growing. Her name was everywhere. But ever since the Production Code Administration had come into effect, it seemed as though a clock was ticking. That spring of 1935, a filing clerk in Milwaukee discovered something West had buried for 24 years. A marriage certificate, dated April 11th, 1911. A 17-year-old Mae West and a vaudeville performer named Frank Wallace. The Associated Press called for comment. West replied, "Why, I never heard of the guy." Nobody seemed to believe her, and Wallace capitalized. He opened a vaudeville act called Mr. Mae West, and he wanted money. And now there was a certificate to prove he was owed it. Mae West was feeling pressure from multiple sides. The Code was shrinking her films, a secret husband was threatening her fortune, and her next picture would test how much fight she had left. Klondike Annie began production in September 1935. West, once again, wrote the screenplay. She would play Rose Carlton, a kept woman trapped by a Chinese gangster in San Francisco. She kills him, flees on a steamer to Alaska, and along the way meets a missionary named Sister Annie, who dies en route. Rose takes the dead woman's identity to avoid arrest and proceeds to rescue a failing mission. It was the most ambitious thing West had attempted on screen. It was also one of the worst possible premises you could put in front of Joseph Breen. A kept woman, a murder, a woman impersonating a religious figure. Breen rejected the first draft outright. What followed wasn't a negotiation, it was a gutting. The censors' demands arrived in waves. West's character could not wear religious clothing, she could not carry a Bible, and she couldn't quote scripture, sing hymns, or sermonize. The mission had to be renamed a settlement house. Breen's suggestions became almost absurd. Instead of preaching, West could recite Mother Goose rhymes or lead the miners in cutting out paper dolls, wholesome settlement house activities designed to remove any suggestion of religious or moral authority. Breen cut 8 minutes from the finished film. The murder scene, the identity swap, and most of the scenes that gave the story any dramatic weight. The film was released on February 21st, 1936. West had tried to do something different with this one. Something bigger, something more dramatic. What was left was a Mae West picture, with a hole where its center used to be. Breen had gone head-to-head with Mae West on the biggest fight of her career, and he had won. And it would be the first of many losses for West. William Randolph Hearst, the most powerful publisher in America, the only person in the country who earned more than Mae West, saw the film and was enraged. A sexual woman, obviously pretending to be a woman of God. He sent a memo to every editor in his newspaper chain. That Mae West picture, Klondike Annie, is a filthy picture. We should have editorials roasting that picture, Mae West, and Paramount. Then a second directive. Do not mention Mae West in our papers again while she is on the screen. In 1936, a Hearst ban wasn't a snub. It was an erasure. His papers reached tens of millions of readers in every major city in the country. To be banned from Hearst's pages was to disappear from the national conversation entirely. Overnight, Mae West had gone from the most talked about woman in America to a name that couldn't be printed. For the next 2 years, West kept working. She kept writing films. She kept making films. But with every picture, there was less of her in them. Go West, Young Man arrived in late 1936. West as a glamorous movie star stranded in rural Pennsylvania, who sets her sights on a local mechanic. Breen described the script as the story of a nymphomaniac treated as comedy, and the censors, again, worked through its dialogue and situations. The reception was mixed, but several critics saw it as a return to form. West was praised, the comedy still found an audience, and the film performed respectably, though it came nowhere near the phenomenon of her first Paramount pictures. Every Day's a Holiday followed in late 1937. West as an 1890s con woman who disguises herself as a French singer to avoid the law. She insisted Paramount hire Louis Armstrong for the picture, and won that fight at least. But the Production Code Administration again demanded cuts to the suggestive dialogue and other material, and the reviews were once again mixed. But this time, the film failed at the box office, the first clear commercial failure of Mae West's Hollywood career. Her salary told much the same story. In 1935, West had earned almost $500,000, making her the highest-earning actor in Hollywood. By 1937, her income had fallen to $323,000, and Gary Cooper had passed her. She was still earning a fortune. She was still one of the most famous women in America. But it was clear the extraordinary momentum of 1933 was no longer carrying her forward. Then she made things considerably worse. She took to the airwaves. On December 12, 1937, Mae West appeared on the Chase and Sanborn Hour, one of the most popular radio programs on NBC, broadcast live on Sunday evening to millions of homes across America. She was there to promote Every Day's a Holiday. The format was simple. First, a comedy sketch with leading man Don Amici, then a back and forth with Edgar Bergen's ventriloquist dummy, Charlie McCarthy. NBC had reviewed the script. they'd approved it. West had rehearsed it on Saturday, reading her lines flat, giving nothing away. The Sunday run-through was also routine. Then she went on the air. The first sketch was a retelling of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. West played Eve. The script, on paper, was tame enough. What West did with it was anything but. She turned every line into an innuendo, every pause into a suggestion, every word into something the writers hadn't written and NBC hadn't approved. Lines like, "Oh, shake your hips," there, now you're through," and "get me a big one," were delivered in a way that made the meaning unmistakable. After the Garden of Eden skit, it was time for Charlie McCarthy, the dummy, made of wood. For West, the jokes wrote themselves. The network executives, meanwhile, had realized what was happening shortly after the live broadcast started. They panicked. They considered cutting the feed. In the end, they decided that pulling her off the air would cause a bigger scandal than letting her finish. NBC received 1,000 complaint letters. The FCC issued a formal reprimand. Religious leaders called it filthy, sacrilegious, and irreverent. Editorials called Mae West a threat to the American home. NBC released a statement. There was nothing indecent in the content of the sketch itself, but it was West's tone and style of performance that made it offensive. It was the purest proof of Breen's diagnosis. You could approve the script, you could not approve Mae West. NBC banned her from the network. Then they went further. They banned even the mention of her name on any NBC broadcast. NBC's 2 national networks reached more American homes than any other broadcaster. She had been effectively erased from the airwaves. Between Hearst's newspapers and NBC's broadcasts, Mae West had been scrubbed from the 2 most powerful media platforms in America. You couldn't print her name. You couldn't say it on the radio. For a woman whose entire career had been built on being impossible to ignore, it was devastating. After the radio fiasco and the box office failure of Every Day's a Holiday, Paramount Studios let Mae West go. But that wasn't the end of it. In May 1938, the Independent Theater Owners Association took out a full-page ad in The Hollywood Reporter. The headline was "Wake Up Hollywood Producers." Wake up, capitalized with an exclamation mark. The message was clear and brutal. Certain stars were killing the film industry, being paid exorbitant amounts for less than stellar box office receipts. The label mentioned in the article that stuck was box office poison. The ad named names: Marlene Dietrich, Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, Greta Garbo, Fred Astaire, and Mae West. West responded to reporters from her bed in a Boston hotel. The only picture to make real money this year was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and that would have made twice as much if they'd had me play Snow White. For the next 2 years, Mae West made no films. She performed no stage shows. She stayed at the Ravenswood, the white and gold apartment, Timony 1 floor down, the phone ringing less than it used to. She wasn't desperate. Timony had invested her money well, real estate mostly. She was still worth millions. She could afford to wait. So she waited. She went to prize fights. She continued writing a screenplay about Catherine the Great that no studio would greenlight. She held seances in her apartment, trying to reach her mother, who had died in 1930. She turned down roles she considered beneath her. David O. Selznick offered her Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind, although some say this may have been a publicity stunt. And she said the part was too small and would need rewriting. She was still Mae West, she just had nowhere to be Mae West. Then, in late 1939, Universal Pictures called. They had an idea. Pair Mae West with W.C. Fields, the legendary comedian, a heavy drinker with a sharp tongue, and an ego to match West's own. Two of the biggest personalities in entertainment, together on screen for the first time. West had reservations. She preferred leading men like Cary Grant, young, handsome, willing to let her run the show. Fields was none of those things. He was almost 60 years old, not known for his looks, and definitely not the kind of man who deferred to anyone. But the offer was real, and real offers had been scarce. So she signed on, and insisted on writing the screenplay. Fields contributed his own scenes and dialogue. The studio gave them equal writing credit, which infuriated West. She claimed she'd written 90% of the script. Fields, for his part, called her a plumber's idea of Cleopatra. What he meant by that was anyone's guess. That it wasn't a compliment was clear enough. On set, they barely spoke except when the cameras were rolling. West had a clause written into her contract. If Fields showed up drunk, he could be removed from set. He tested it once and was sent home. The film, My Little Chickadee, opened in early 1940. It made $2 million, Fields' biggest hit at Universal. But it was obvious to anyone this was a novelty, not a comeback. Two big, funny stars in one frame. It was entertaining enough, but it proved nothing about either one's future. West refused to work with Fields again, or talk about him. And then, nothing. The rest of 1940, 1941, and 1942 were spent at the Ravenswood, still writing, holding seances, going to the fights. The routine hadn't changed, and the phone still wasn't ringing. One thing, at least, resolved itself. Frank Wallace, the secret husband from 1911, the man she denied knowing and who had spent years suing her for a share of her fortune, finally agreed to drop his claim. West's lawyers had found his weakness. He'd married another woman in 1916 without ever divorcing West. He had no leg to stand on. The divorce was finalized in 1943. West would reportedly close the chapter with the line, "He'll always remain in the wastebasket of my memories." Then an old friend came calling with a favor. Gregory Radoff, a Russian-born director, an old friend from the New York days, came to West with a pitch. He needed her name attached to get a picture greenlit at Columbia, a musical comedy. He promised her it would be worth her time. It wasn't. The Heat's On was released in November 1943. It was the only film since her first, Night After Night, that Mae West didn't write. She did what she always did, the walk, the wisecracks, the slow delivery. She showed up and she was Mae West. And for the first time, it wasn't enough. James Agee, writing in The Nation, called it a stale ale musical in which a lot of good people apathetically support the almost equally apathetic Mae West. Variety delivered another verdict. West looks well, but her technique somehow seems dated. Dated. For a woman who had built her entire life on being ahead of the room, there was no worse word in the English language. One of her most famous quips would be, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." But in a quieter moment, she said something that may have been closer to the truth. It's hard to be funny when you have to be clean. Mae West wouldn't make another picture for 27 years. Mae West walked away from Hollywood, but she didn't retire. She went back to what she knew. In August 1944, she opened Catherine Was Great on Broadway, the comedy she'd written as a screenplay after Paramount dropped her. It was about, as the title suggests, Catherine the Great of Russia, a woman West considered a past life version of herself. Critics hated it. Audiences packed it. It ran 191 performances. Opening night was a war bond fundraiser. No one could buy a ticket without buying a bond. Some premium seats were priced at many thousands of dollars, a few reportedly for much more. The evening ended up generating a staggering $4 million in bond purchases. The audience, at least, had welcomed Mae West back, and the stage had always been home. So she leaned into it. In 1948, she revived Diamond Lil, first in London, then back on Broadway in 1949, then again in 1951, then years of touring across the country. It was nostalgia, and she knew it, but the houses were full. The New York Times called her as beloved and indestructible as Donald Duck. Another critic called the revival a triumph of nostalgic vulgarity. The reviews had shifted. Mae West was no longer dangerous. She was an institution. Around the time she was reviving Diamond Lil, director Billy Wilder approached West about a role in a new picture he was writing, a film that would eventually be called Sunset Boulevard. The part was Norma Desmond, a former silent film star who refuses to accept that Hollywood has moved on without her. West turned it down. She was reportedly insulted. She wasn't a has-been. She'd never been a has-been. Why would she play one? Through all of this, Timony was there. Her money, her contracts, her problems, all of it still running through him the way it had since 1916. But by the early 50s, he was failing. Heart trouble. He'd retired from managing her in 1949, but he couldn't stop working entirely. He was still trying to put together one last project. By some accounts, a Las Vegas hotel casino he wanted to call Mae West's Diamond Lil Casino. In November 1951, West closed Diamond Lil on Broadway. Not because the run was over, because Timony's health was getting worse, and she wanted to be near him. He held on for another 2.5 years, in and out of the hospital, still living at the Ravenswood, still trying from his sickbed to put together the Vegas project. James Timony died on April 5th, 1954, at Ravenswood. He was 69. He and West had been together, in one configuration or another, for 38 years. West told reporters she'd taken the loss hard, and that was all she said. It was one of the only times anyone could remember West not having a line ready. 4 months after Timony's death, West was back on stage. She was now 61 years old. The venue this time was the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas, and the act was something new. Songs and sketches, backed by 9 bodybuilders in loincloths, flexing and posing while she worked the crowd. "I've got something for the girls," she sang to the audience. "Boys, boys, boys." The act sold out, and for the next 5 years, toured the country. It was through the show that West met the man who would become her last and most devoted companion. One of the muscle men, a former wrestler from Baltimore named Chester Rubinski, 30 years her junior. West told him to change his name. He became Paul Novak. The years that followed were quiet ones. No films, no Broadway. West at the Ravenswood with Novak. Writing, holding her seances, going to prize fights. In 1970, Hollywood came calling again. 20th Century Fox was making a film of Gore Vidal's Myra Breckinridge, a satirical novel about sex, gender, and the death of old Hollywood. Raquel Welch was playing the title role. They wanted West for Letitia Van Allen, a talent agent who auditions her male clients in the bedroom. It had been 27 years since her last picture. West agreed, but she had terms. She would rewrite her own dialogue. She would arrive no earlier than 5 p.m. She would approve her co-star Raquel Welch's wardrobe as well as her own. And she would be paid $350,000, more than double what Welch was getting. Fox agreed to all of it. They weren't paying for an actress. They were paying for a headline. Mae West returns to the screen after 27 years. And it, of course, did make headlines. "It's a return, not a comeback," West told reporters. "I've never been away, just busy." The production was chaos. West and Welch reportedly despised each other. They never appeared in the same frame, their scenes filmed separately at different times. At the premiere, the two women did not appear together. The reviews were bad. Time called it about as funny as a child molester. Vidal disowned it. It was a box office bomb. Critics were divided on West specifically. Some dismissed her as a camp throwback. Others thought she was the sharpest thing in the picture. But on one point, most seemed to agree. Even after almost 3 decades off screen, Mae West could still hold it. And at 77, she wasn't done. It would take another 8 years, but she had one more film in her. And this would be a return to all of it. The wisecracks, the leading men, the diamonds, the innuendo. All the things that had made Mae West, back on screen one more time. The picture would be called Sextette. She'd written the script herself, a farce about a Hollywood sex symbol on her honeymoon who keeps running into ex-husbands, adapted from a stage play she'd first produced in Chicago in 1961. An independent producer put up the money. No major studio would touch it. She pulled together a cast, and a good one. Timothy Dalton, Ringo Starr, Tony Curtis. And it would film on the Paramount lot. A rented studio space this time, but still the place where it all started. Filming began in December 1976. West was 83. Her hearing was going. Her vision was fading. The director fed her lines through an earpiece under her wig. She showed up every day, She rewrote dialogue she didn't like. Timothy Dalton, her leading man, and more than 50 years her junior, called the experience remarkable. But not a good film, of course. Sextette opened at the Cinerama Dome in March 1978. No major distributor would handle it, so in total, it made $50,000. The budget had been several million. The reviews were merciless. Critics attacked the film itself, but much of the ridicule was directed at West. Her age, her appearance, the elaborate costumes and makeup, and the sight of an 83-year-old woman still presenting herself as an ageless sex symbol. For anyone else, it would have been humiliating. West didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she wasn't going to let anyone see it. She went back to her life at the Ravenswood with Novak. 2 years passed. Then, in August 1980, Mae West tripped getting out of bed. At the hospital, doctors confirmed she'd suffered a stroke. It left her unable to speak. A second stroke followed in September. It paralyzed much of her right side. She spent 3 months at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, then came home to Ravenswood. Novak took care of her. They'd been together now for 26 years. On the morning of November 22nd, 1980, a doctor arrived to check on her. He told Novak there was nothing more to be done. It was time. Novak called for a priest from the Catholic Church down the block. The priest gave West a final blessing. A few minutes later, she was gone. She was 87 years old. The funeral was held 3 days later at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. There were 100 mourners for the private service. West lay in an open casket in a white negligee, the lower half of the casket covered in white roses. The minister called her a good woman and said goodness, in the end, had everything to do with it. That evening, her body was flown to Brooklyn. She was buried the next morning at Cypress Hills Cemetery, in the family mausoleum she'd purchased in 1930 when her mother died. Next to Tilly, next to Battle and Jack, next to her brother John. By then, the culture that had once tried to contain her had moved much closer to her side. The sexual revolution had brought into the open many of the things West had spent decades insisting could be spoken about, joked about, and owned without shame. By the late 1960s and early 70s, parts of the culture had begun to look at her differently. Some younger audiences began treating her not simply as a relic of another era, but as a woman who had challenged the rules surrounding sex and female behavior decades earlier. In 1971, students at UCLA had voted Mae West Woman of the Century. She'd accepted the honor. She knew they would come around eventually. The woman, once arrested, censored, and banned for being too much, had lived long enough to be celebrated for many of the same reasons. Years earlier, in her autobiography, Goodness Had Nothing to Do with It, Mae West had reflected on what it meant to become a legend, an institution, in her own lifetime. Was it lonely? Was it exhausting? Was it worth it? It didn't frighten me, she wrote. I got fun out of being an institution. That's a wrap on this week's episode of When They Were Making It, and our look into the life of Mae West. I'm Patrick Rankin, writer, producer, and your host. Original artwork by Simone Beach, and original music by Lionel Zablat. Thank you for listening and for helping keep these stories alive. Our Patreon, When They Were Making It, The Backlot, is officially open. There are companion after shows for each main feed subject, bonus audio episodes, monthly Q&A extras, and an upcoming full-length Studio Insider episode on Grace Kelly, tracing the actress, her Hitchcock collaborations, and the making of the royal image that came to define her. You'll find the backlot at patreon.com/whentheyweremaking it, or through the link in the show notes. We also post a visual companion for each episode on Instagram, with images, added context, and another side of the story. We're When They Were Making It on Instagram and TikTok. And if you're enjoying the show, please follow us in whatever app you're listening in. It means every new episode lands automatically, and it's the clearest sign to Apple and Spotify that these stories are finding an audience. But the honest truth is, a show like this doesn't grow through ads or algorithms. It grows because one person hears it and tells another. So if this was worth your time, tell someone. That does more than anything else. Until next time, keep watching, and remember, behind every great film is an even greater story.